The slap echoed like a thunderclap, sharp enough to make every head in the private jet snap toward the sound. If looks could kill, the flight attendant's glare would have buried Marcus Tate 6 feet under before the plane even took off. Marcus stood still, his cheek stinging but his expression unreadable. At 42, he'd faced worse than a rogue hand from a woman half his size. Around him, the cabin of the Gulfstream G650, a floating palace of walnut paneling and cream leather, was thick with tension. The other passengers, a mix of suited executives and a pop star's entourage, froze mid-sip or mid-scroll, their eyes darting between Marcus and the flight attendant, Claire Hensley. Her name tag gleamed under the soft cabin lights, but her face was a mask of fury, lips trembling as if she might spit venom next. "What did you just say to me?" Claire hissed, her voice low but slicing through the silence. Her blonde ponytail swung as she leaned forward, daring him to repeat himself. Marcus didn't flinch. He adjusted his tie, the motion deliberate, and met her gaze with a calm that seemed to infuriate her more. "I said," Marcus replied, his voice smooth as the jet's engines humming outside, "that I'd prefer to be addressed with respect. That's all." His words were measured, but they carried a weight that made Claire's jaw tighten. To her, he was just another passenger, black, unassuming, probably some mid-level manager who'd lucked into a seat on this exclusive charter. She had no idea who he really was. The trouble started 10 minutes earlier, during boarding at Teterboro Airport. Marcus, dressed in a charcoal Brioni suit, had boarded quietly, his leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He'd chosen a window seat near the back, avoiding the usual chatter of the elite crowd. Claire, working her third flight of the day, had been curt from the start. When Marcus asked for a glass of water before takeoff, her response was a clipped, "Wait until we're airborne." "No, sir." No smile, just a flick of her eyes that lingered a beat too long, as if sizing him up. Marcus hadn't reacted then. He'd seen that look before on teachers who assumed he'd cheat, on cops who pulled him over for routine checks, on colleagues who questioned how a black man rose so fast in a cutthroat industry. He was used to it. But when Claire snapped at him again, this time for adjusting his seat without her permission, something in him stirred. He'd spoken up, politely but firmly, and now here they were. Her handprint blooming red on his face, the cabin a powder keg waiting for a spark. "You don't get to talk to me like that," Claire said, her voice rising. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing the air an inch from his chest. "I'm in charge here. You're lucky to even be on this flight." The words dripped with condescension, and a murmur rippled through the cabin. A man in a pinstripe suit coughed awkwardly. A woman with diamond earrings whispered to her companion, her eyes wide. Marcus raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "Lucky, you say?" His tone was almost amused, but there was steel beneath it. He glanced around, taking in the faces of the other passengers, some curious, some uncomfortable, none willing to intervene. Interesting choice of words. Claire's face flushed deeper. She was 28, with 5 years of experience on private jets, and she prided herself on handling difficult passengers. To her, Marcus was just that, a problem to be managed. She didn't know that the man she just struck was Marcus Tate, founder of Tate Ventures, a tech empire worth billions. She didn't know that this jet, with its custom interiors and state-of-the-art avionics, belonged to him. He'd chartered it for this trip to Miami, allowing a few other high-profile clients to join as a courtesy. To Claire, he was just a name on a manifest, and she'd made a snap judgment the moment she saw him. "Sit down," she ordered, pointing to his seat, "or I'll have you removed before we take off." Her voice shook slightly, betraying a crack in her confidence. Marcus didn't move. He tilted his head, studying her like a chess player sizing up an opponent's blunder. "Removed?" he repeated, his voice soft but carrying a quiet menace. "By whom, exactly?" The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Claire hesitated. Something in his demeanor, his unshakable calm, the way he seemed to own the space around him made her second-guess herself. But she doubled down, her pride refusing to let her back off. "Security," she snapped. "Or the captain. Your choice." She crossed her arms, her nails digging into her sleeves. The other passengers were openly staring now, their phones discreetly angled to capture the drama. A young man in a hoodie, part of the pop star's crew, muttered, "This is wild." Under his breath, Marcus let out a low chuckle, the sound rich and disarming. "The captain, huh? That's a bold move." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a slim tablet, its screen glowing as he tapped it. "Let's see what Captain Reynolds has to say about that." Claire's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" she demanded, but Marcus ignored her. His fingers moved swiftly, pulling up a document on the tablet. He turned the screen toward her, just enough for her to glimpse the logo of Tate Ventures and a contract with his name at the top. Her eyes flicked over the text, and a flicker of doubt crossed her face. "This jet," Marcus said, his voice steady, "is mine. I own it. And every soul on board, including you, is here because I allowed it." The words landed like a sledgehammer. Claire's mouth opened, then closed, her bravado crumbling. The cabin went deathly silent, the hum of the engines the only sound. A woman in the front row gasped. The man in the pinstripe suit leaned forward, his eyebrows shooting up. Even the pop star, who'd been half asleep with earbuds in, pulled them out to stare. Claire's face drained of color, her hand twitching as if she might reach for the tablet to confirm what she just heard. "You're lying," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Marcus didn't bother responding. He handed the tablet to the passenger next to him, a middle-aged woman in a silk blouse who'd been watching the exchange with growing unease. She scanned the screen, her eyes widening, and passed it to the man beside her. Whispers spread like wildfire. Claire took a step back, her breath hitching. I thought," she faltered, her hands trembling. Marcus watched her, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp, taking in every micro-expression. He could have humiliated her further, could have demanded her badge or called the charter company to have her fired on the spot. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "You assumed," he said quietly. "And that's the problem. You saw me and decided who I was before I even opened my mouth." His words weren't cruel, but they cut deeper than any shout. Claire's eyes glistened, and she looked away, her jaw clenched. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cleared for takeoff. Please take your seats." The announcement jolted the passengers back to reality, and they began to settle, though their eyes kept darting toward Marcus and Claire. Marcus returned to his seat, his movements smooth and unhurried. Claire stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked stiffly toward the galley, her head bowed. The other flight attendant, a younger man named Javier, shot her a questioning look but said nothing. As the jet taxied toward the runway, the cabin buzzed with hushed conversations, the incident already taking on a life of its own. For Marcus, the slap was just another scar, one more mark in a lifetime of battles fought and won. He stared out the window, watching the tarmac blur as the jet picked up speed. His mind wasn't on Claire or the whispers around him. It was on his daughter, Lena, waiting for him in Miami. She was 16, sharp as a tack, and starting to ask hard questions about the world questions he'd have to answer with more than just money or success. The jet lifted off, climbing into the late afternoon sky. Marcus closed his eyes, the hum of the engines lulling him into a moment of calm. He'd built an empire from nothing, defied every odd, and yet here he was, still fighting the same old fight. The sting on his cheek had faded, but the weight of the moment lingered. This wasn't just about him. It was about every person who'd ever been judged, dismissed, or struck down for who they were. Back in the galley, Claire leaned against the counter, her hands shaking as she poured a glass of water she didn't drink. Javier hovered nearby, unsure whether to speak. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice gentle. Claire shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I messed up," she whispered. "Big time." She thought of her training, her dreams of working on the world's most exclusive flights, her belief that she was above the biases she'd grown up around. And yet, in a split second, she'd proven herself wrong. The flight was only 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity. Marcus stayed in his seat, working on his tablet, his face a mask of focus. The other passengers stole glances at him, some with newfound respect, others with curiosity. The pop star's manager, a wiry man named Tony, leaned over and whispered, "That guy's the real deal, huh?" The woman in the silk blouse nodded. "More than you know," she said. She'd recognized Marcus from a Forbes article, had seen his name on the charter contract. She wondered how Claire could have been so blind. As the jet cruised at 40,000 feet, Marcus opened an email from his assistant, confirming a meeting in Miami with investors. He typed a quick reply, then paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. He thought about Claire, about the look in her eyes when she realized her mistake. He could ruin her career with a single call, but that wasn't his style. Revenge was easy. Change was harder. He opened a new email, addressing it to the charter company's CEO, a man he'd met once at a conference. The subject line read, "Incident on today's flight." He began typing, his words careful but direct, describing the altercation without exaggeration. He didn't call for Claire's firing. Instead, he suggested training mandatory, comprehensive, focused on bias and respect. "This isn't just about one person," he wrote. "It's about the culture we create." He hit send, then leaned back, the weight of the day settling over him. The jet began its descent into Miami, the city's skyline glinting in the distance. Marcus thought of Lena again, of the world she'd inherit. He'd fought for her future, for a world where she wouldn't have to face what he had. But the fight was far from over. In the galley, Claire's phone buzzed with a message from her supervisor, asking her to report to the office after landing. Her stomach dropped. She knew what was coming. She glanced toward the cabin, catching a glimpse of Marcus through the curtain. He was looking out the window, his face serene, as if the storm had never happened. For the first time, Claire saw him not as a passenger, not as a problem, but as a man. And in that moment, she felt the full weight of what she'd done. The jet touched down in Miami with a gentle thud, the wheels kissing the runway as the city's humid air shimmered outside. Marcus Tate unbuckled his seatbelt, his movements deliberate, as if the weight of the earlier confrontation still clung to him. The other passengers gathered their belongings, their whispers now subdued, but their eyes lingered on him, a mix of awe and unease. Claire Hensley, the flight attendant who'd slapped him, had disappeared into the galley, her absence as loud as her earlier outburst. Marcus didn't look for her. He had bigger things on his mind, his daughter, Lena, and the world he was trying to build for her. As the cabin door opened, warm air flooded in, carrying the scent of jet fuel and salt. Marcus stepped onto the tarmac, his satchel slung over his shoulder, and glanced at his phone. A text from Lena. "Dad, You here yet? Can't wait to see you. A smile softened his face, the first real one since the incident. He typed a quick reply, just landed, kiddo. Be there soon. And headed toward the private terminal, where a black SUV waited to take him to his beachfront condo. Inside the terminal, Claire sat in a small office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her supervisor, a stern woman named Margaret with gray streaks in her hair, sat across from her, a tablet open to Marcus's email. Claire's stomach churned as Margaret's eyes scanned the screen. Her lips pursed. This is serious, Claire, Margaret said, her voice clipped. You struck a passenger. The owner of the jet, no less. Do you have any idea how bad this looks? Claire's throat tightened. I didn't know who he was, she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought he was, I don't know what I thought. She stared at her hands, her nails bitten down to the quick. She'd grown up in a small town where people like Marcus were rare, where assumptions about race were whispered behind closed doors. She told herself she was different, that she'd left those biases behind. But today she'd proven herself wrong. Margaret sighed, leaning back in her chair. That's the problem, Claire. You didn't think. You reacted. And now we're in damage control. She tapped the tablet. Mr. Tate didn't demand your termination, which is frankly more generous than most would be. He's asking for training sensitivity, bias, the works, for everyone. I'm inclined to agree. Claire nodded, her eyes burning. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but the memory of Marcus's calm, piercing gaze stopped her. She'd misjudged him, reduced him to a stereotype in a split second. The shame was suffocating. Meanwhile, Marcus slid into the back seat of the SUV, the leather cool against his suit. The driver, a middle-aged man named Carlos, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Rough flight, sir? He asked, his tone light but curious. Word traveled fast in the private aviation world. Marcus chuckled, the sound low and wry. You could say that. He didn't elaborate, and Carlos didn't press. As the SUV pulled onto the highway, Miami's skyline glittered against the dusk. A city of contrasts, wealth and struggle, beauty and grit. Marcus's thoughts drifted to Lena. She'd be waiting at the condo, probably sprawled on the couch with her sketchbook, her latest drawings scattered around her. At 16, she was a force artistic, outspoken, and fiercely curious. She'd want to know every detail of the flight, and he'd have to decide how much to tell her. Back at the terminal, Claire was given a choice: a formal reprimand and mandatory training, or resignation. She chose the former, her voice barely audible as she signed the paperwork. Margaret watched her, her expression softening slightly. You're young, Claire. You can learn from this. But you have to want to. Claire nodded, her mind replaying the moment her hand met Marcus's cheek. She'd been so sure of herself, so convinced she was in control. Now she felt small, exposed. As she left the office, Javier, the other flight attendant, was waiting outside. He fell into step beside her, his usual easy grin absent. You okay? He asked, echoing his earlier question. Claire shook her head, her eyes fixed on the polished floor. I don't know how to fix this, she admitted. I didn't just mess up a job. I hurt someone. Her voice broke, and she stopped walking, pressing a hand to her mouth. Javier hesitated, then rested a hand on her shoulder. Then make it right, he said simply. Not for him, for you. Claire looked at him, her eyes searching for a lifeline. She didn't know how to start, but for the first time she wanted to try. At the condo, Lena launched herself at Marcus the moment he stepped through the door, her arms wrapping around him in a fierce hug. You're late, she teased, her braids swinging as she pulled back to grin at him. Her eyes, sharp like her mother's, caught the faint redness on his cheek. "Dad, what happened to your face?" Marcus hesitated, then ruffled her hair. "Long story, kiddo. Let's eat first." He didn't want to burden her with the ugliness of the day. Not yet. They ordered pizza, her favorite, extra pepperoni, and sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean. The waves crashed below, a steady rhythm that grounded him. Lena chattered about her art, her friends, the internship she was eyeing at a local gallery. Marcus listened, his heart swelling with pride, but his mind kept circling back to the flight. Finally, as they cleared the plates, Lena fixed him with a look.
Okay, spill.
What happened on that plane? And don't give me the "it's nothing" routine. At 16, she was relentless, her intuition razor-sharp. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Someone made a mistake," he said carefully. "A flight attendant. She judged me before she knew me. Things got heated." He touched his cheek, the sting long gone but the memory fresh. Lena's eyes narrowed. "She hit you?" Her voice was sharp, protective. Marcus nodded, and she leaned forward, her hands gripping the table. "That's not okay, Dad. Who does she think she is?" "She thought I was nobody," Marcus said, his tone calm but heavy. "And that's the point. People see what they want to see. Skin, clothes, accent, they build a story before you even open your mouth." He paused, choosing his words. "But it's not just her. It's the world she grew up in, the one that taught her to assume." Lena's face softened, but her eyes were fierce. "So what did you do? Please tell me you didn't just let it slide." She knew her father, quiet, strategic, but never one to back down. Marcus smiled faintly. "I didn't make a scene, if that's what you mean, but I made sure she knew who I was. And I sent an email to her boss, not to get her fired, but to push for change. Training, awareness, something to make this less likely to happen again." Lena nodded, her expression a mix of pride and frustration. "You're too nice," she muttered, but there was a smile in her voice. "I would have made her sweat." Marcus laughed, the sound easing the tension in his chest. "You're trouble, you know that?" They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the ocean's rhythm filling the space. But Lena wasn't done. "Dad," she said, her voice softer now, "does it ever get easier, dealing with people like that?" Her question hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Marcus felt a pang in his chest. He wanted to lie, to tell her the world would always be kind to her. But he owed her the truth. "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't get easier, but you get stronger. You learn to carry it, to turn it into fuel. And you find people worth fighting for." He reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Like you." The next morning, Marcus woke early, the Miami sunrise painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He had a meeting with investors at 10, but his mind was elsewhere. He opened his laptop, checking for a response from the charter company's CEO. The reply was brief but promising. "Mr. Tate, we're deeply sorry for the incident. We're implementing your suggestions for training across our staff, effective immediately. Ms. Hensley will be disciplined but retained, per your recommendation. Thank you for your grace." Marcus closed the laptop, satisfied but not relieved. Grace was a choice, but it didn't erase the sting. He thought of Claire, wondering if she'd take this as a chance to grow or just another bruise to her ego. He hoped for the former, but he'd learned not to expect it. Across town, Claire sat in her apartment, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd spent the night replaying the flight, dissecting every moment, every assumption. She'd Googled Marcus Tate, her heart sinking as she read about his rise from a kid in Chicago's South Side to a tech titan who'd revolutionized data security. Articles praised his quiet philanthropy, his mentorship programs for black youth, his refusal to play the flashy billionaire game. She'd misjudged him so completely it made her sick. She opened her email, drafting an apology she wasn't sure she'd ever send. Mr. Tate, I don't know where to begin. What I did was inexcusable. I'm learning, and I promise to do better. She stared at the words, her finger hovering over the send button. Felt inadequate, but it was a start. Back at the condo, Marcus and Lena spent the day together, visiting her favorite art gallery and grabbing lunch at a food truck by the beach. Lena sketched in her notebook, her pencil flying over the page as she captured the vibrant chaos of Miami. Marcus watched her, his heart full but heavy. He knew the world she'd face, one where her talent, her fire, her very existence would be questioned because of her skin. He'd do everything to shield her, but he couldn't protect her from it all. That evening, as they walked along the boardwalk, Lena brought up the incident again. You think that flight attendant learned anything? She asked, kicking a pebble into the sand. Marcus shrugged. Maybe. People don't change overnight. But sometimes, a crack lets the light in. He glanced at her, his eyes warm. You keep asking the hard questions, Lena. That's how you make the world better. She grinned, bumping her shoulder against his. You're such a dad sometimes. But her smile faded slightly. I just wish it didn't have to be so hard. For you, for me, for everyone like us. Marcus nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Me too, kiddo. Me too. The incident on the jet didn't make headlines. Marcus had made sure of that, quietly settling things with the charter company. But it rippled outward. Claire enrolled in the training program, her initial resentment giving way to a reluctant curiosity. She listened to stories of others' experiences, stories she'd never thought to seek out before. It wasn't a transformation, not yet, but it was a step. Marcus, meanwhile, doubled down on his work, funding new scholarships for underrepresented kids in tech. He didn't talk about the flight again, but it stayed with him, a reminder of the battles still to be fought. Lena's sketches from that weekend included a portrait of her father, his face calm but resolute, a quiet storm against the backdrop of a turbulent sky. The story of Marcus and Claire isn't just theirs, it's a mirror for the world. Who was right, who was wrong, and where does justice lie when prejudice collides with power? Share your thoughts, because in the end, it's the conversations we start that shape the future we share.